Who says healthy chocolate cake can't also be delicious? Today, in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you three of my favorite game-changing secrets to make this cake something that you actually want to eat. It's healthy and delicious. It's my favorite combination. And stay tuned to the end because I'm going to share with you, I don't know, a little bonus tip that I think transforms this cake into something just totally over the top delicious. So that's what I'm excited about today. Hi, I'm Marley. I'm with the site Namely Marley, and I'm so glad that you've joined me here today. You know, the kitchen is my happy place, and having you join me makes it even better. So thank you. And you know, I think when we talk about healthy cake, a lot of people have this image in their mind that something that tastes similar to cardboard. Oh, nobody wants that. Dry, flavorless, you know, but of course you eat it because it's healthy. But what if you could change that? What if you could flip that on its head and say, let's make this cake actually something that's really delicious, indulgent, rich, chocolatey, all of the things. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's get started. This recipe begins with flour, and a lot of flour or cake recipes have all-purpose flour. There's a reason for that, but today we're going to be using whole wheat flour. Believe it or not, this is a cup and a half of whole wheat flour. I'm going to put this right here in the bowl. Now, the thing about whole wheat flour is sometimes it can be a little bit dense, but we're going to do some things today to make it lighter. But that's my tip number one, is to use whole wheat flour. And you can also use whole wheat pastry flour. That's a different type of wheat, but it works great. So if you can get your hands on whole wheat pastry flour, that stuff is amazing. So to that, we're going to add a cup of sugar. You can use coconut sugar. That's been known to be a little bit on the healthier side, but we're just using brown sugar today. And I've got a third of a cup of cocoa powder. That's going to add lots of great cocoa flavor. And here I have a teaspoon of baking soda and a teaspoon of baking powder. These two together are going to give this cake lots of lift, which is what we want. And I'm going to add a half teaspoon of salt. So these are the dry ingredients. I'm going to stir this together. And you just want to make sure you get everything combined. You don't want clumps of baking soda in one bite. You want to get it just kind of equally distributed. It's pretty simple to do. Just a few turns of the spatula here and we're ready to go. So let's move on to the wet ingredients. Now I have a cup of water, nice and simple, and I have a third of a cup of applesauce. Let me get this out of here. Applesauce is my tip number two because it helps create a moist cake, which is what we're after. It adds a little bit more moisture, and with that, I'm going to be adding a quarter cup of vegetable oil. This is a little bit less vegetable oil than I typically use in a cake, and that applesauce is what's going to make the difference. So between the applesauce and the lower level of vegetable oil, that helps make this a healthier cake. And here I have 2 flax eggs. So that's 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed combined with 6 tablespoons of water. So I'm going to put that in here. And then I have a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. That is another thing that's going to make this cake light and fluffy, which is what we're after. So I'm going to give this a stir. And then my favorite bonus tip I wanted to talk with you about is coffee. We need to add some flavor enhancers to make sure your flavor of your cake is just out of this world. So a teaspoon of instant coffee brings out that cocoa flavor in an amazing way. So whatever cake you're making, if you're making a vanilla cake, then just make sure that vanilla flavor really stands out because that will make your healthy cake taste better. Jennifer Ray says, hello, Jennifer from Scotland, and I love chocolate cake. I knew we were related, Jennifer. We both love chocolate cake. Erin says, what if you don't have flax eggs? That's a great question, Erin. First of all, thanks for joining us. And if you don't have flax egg, there's other things that you can use. Like last week, we talked about chia as a great egg replacer. So you could use ground chia seeds. That's another great option. Or you can just substitute with an equal amount of like a plant-based milk. That's just going to add that moisture and it's going to be delicious. Another thing I oftentimes use will be something like sour cream or yogurt. I have plant-based yogurt. It's delicious and it just adds that moisture that you're going to get out of an egg. So I really recommend that. Okay, now before we move on to combining the wet and the dry ingredients. I always check a couple of things before I make this next step, because we're going to be using that chemical reaction of the vinegar mixing with the baking soda, and we want to take advantage of that while the oven is hot. But that means the oven has to be preheated. I have my oven preheated at 350 Fahrenheit. And so that's step number one. And number two is I always want to have my pan ready. And so my pan, what I did is I put a sheet of parchment paper. This is an 8-inch square. I love using the 8-inch square because it gives the cake a nice height, and I love that. I like a high cake myself. So this is, I lined it with basically parchment paper and just gave it a light coating of vegetable oil. Okay, now we're gonna combine these two. And I know if you're counting, I said 3 tips, and you're probably thinking, where is tip number 3? I've already given out the bonus, which is the added flavor, and we haven't talked about tip number 3. That's coming, I promise. Just hold on. First, let's stir this together. And when I'm stirring the batter together, I always start out kind of folding the ingredients, just to we want to get the flour to absorb this liquid. And as you know, you never want to overbeat, but you do have to make sure you get enough mixing going on here to break up any large clumps of flour, because that flour will leave pockets in your batter. It's not the end of the world, obviously, but to make sure that your cake looks as good as you want it to, I just like giving it a little bit of a whisk like this. There we go. That looks pretty good. You can just stir it, but I think a whisk gives it a little bit more oomph. And so I've got my prepared pan, and let's go over here, and we're going to pour this batter right in the pan. I always use a spatula to help me get all those all the batter I can in there. No waste. Okay, there we go. And then another great tip is just to kind of shake the batter in the pan, or give it a little smack against the countertop, just to kind of release some of those air bubbles. And this goes in the oven, and we're going to bake it for 30 to 35 minutes. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to set the timer. If I don't set the timer, then I can guarantee you I'll get busy with other things, and then I'll forget. So tip number 3 to make your cake healthier comes down to the frosting. I know we all love buttercream, and I am personally a buttercream fan. And I actually did a video recently about alternatives to buttercream, because as much as we all love it, it's not always the healthiest. And some people actually don't like it at all, because it's kind of got a gritty texture, because it's got so much sugar in it. And so I have found some wonderful alternatives. I'd like for you to check out that video so you can see some of my favorites. Today, what I'm using is whipped ganache. And what I did, it's so easy to do. I just used semi-sweet chocolate chips, and I added the cream from a can of coconut milk. So I refrigerate the can a little bit so that coconut fat comes to the top of the can, and it's really easy to pull it out. And melt those two together, and then let it solidify, and then you just whip it. That's all this is just whipped ganache. It's so delicious. And if you can imagine, semi-sweet chocolate chip doesn't have a lot of sugar in it. But look at this. It looks just like buttercream. It's really soft and fluffy, and it adds so much goodness. So I'm going to show you how basically this is just one slice, but when the cake gets done, you remove it from the oven and let it cool completely. That's the trick, because this whipped ganache will definitely melt if you put it on a hot cake. So you want to let the cake cool, and then put this on, and look at that. It's just this gorgeous cake. You can add, what I really love is, because I'm a frosting person. I love lots of frosting. So I don't feel too bad I feel like this is kind of guilt-free frosting, because it's not a lot of sugar. And look at that. That's just delicious looking. You don't feel bad about that at all. And that is a delicious chocolate cake. That is definitely. Now you might ask the question, can I make this cake gluten-free? And the answer is absolutely, you can make it gluten-free. Just use a gluten-free baking flour, and that's going to work just fine. So yeah, that's basically my tips for making a delicious chocolate healthy cake that's got a little bit more fiber thanks to whole wheat flour. It's got a little bit less oil thanks to applesauce, but it still has a lot of moisture. And it has a healthy frosting that gives it lots of, moist and delicious texture. So those are my favorite tips. I would love to hear from you. What are your favorite tips? Or first of all, what are your favorite tips that I shared today? But second, do you have any tips that you use to make your cakes healthier? Because I would love to hear from you. I love the brainstorming that happens when we do these videos. So I love hearing from you on that. So, it's time for my favorite part of any cooking demonstration, and that is the taste test. So let's go into this one. Let's dive into it. And I'm going to make sure I get lots of frosting in there because that's my favorite part. Okay. Mm. Mm. So chocolatey. Mm. So moist. Look at that. That is a moist cake, and that chocolate frosting on the top is, the bite just comes together. It's just delicious. It's like, honestly, it's really very indulgent tasting. So that's one thing I love about this cake is it's indulgent and delicious. So thank you for joining me today. I had a really good time, and I always do when you're here with me in my kitchen. So if you liked today's video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more recipes coming your way every week. Bite number 2.